I love Oregon. It's the greatest state in the US to me. It's this eclectic and slightly scary mix of the newest aspects of Western civilization crashing directly into the oldest and most metaphysical feelings that exist, soaked into the American soil that was here long before anyone who looked like me stood in these woods. I also love comic books. Big shock, I know. Hell, I'm writing a comic book entirely about Oregon right now. Which is why it's so frustrating that there are so few examples of Oregon in comics. While there are tons of comic creators from Oregon, like Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Ross, the unfortunate reality of it is that comic books, as we know them today, were first synthesized into reality on the exact opposite side of this country. New York dominates the world of comics, especially when it comes to the big two companies of DC and Marvel. Even characters like Jessica Cruz, one of the only popular big two characters from Oregon, leaves Oregon for deep space. Even more independent comic publishers that call Oregon their home, like Dark Horse or Oni Press, tend to not print many stories set here. And I think there's a reason for that. Oregon is really damn complicated. Like the forests that cover nearly the entire state, it's not in possession of one solid identifiable soul like, say, California or Texas or Louisiana. But I think, with a little inferring, the few cases we do have of comics set in Oregon can help us decode what Oregon actually is. And I encourage other people to do this with their own home states or just their favorite state. Part 1. Oregon is an escape. You tend to hear this a lot from people who move here. Oregon is seen by a lot of folks as an escape, a respite from the realities of the East Coast or the mundane day-to-day life of the Midwest. You can reinvent yourself in Oregon, or at least that's how it's been sold lately. Maybe that's why, in several different key moments, one Peter Parker has deemed that yes, Oregon is his escape. This is a really weird era for Spider-Man that I see barely addressed nowadays, primarily because it deals with the giant, complicated mess that's known as the Clone Saga. But all you need to know in this case is that Peter Parker briefly retired from the role of Spider-Man, which was taken up by his clone, Ben Reilly.
I will explain it all in good time.
Peter and MJ, to drive home the alleged finality of this change, moved to Portland, Oregon, whisked away from New York to proudly declare that Ben was permanently the new Spider-Man. And you know where this is going. Of course they undid this. But we have been blessed with a few shorter Spidey comics that detail Peter and MJ's life in the City of Roses. Primarily The Lost Hunt by J.M. DeMatteis and The Final Adventure by Fabian Nicieza. And it's really interesting to see how these books portray the actual city of Portland, Oregon. In Final Adventure, the art and narration tend to paint it as a very idyllic, sleepy West Coast city. MJ and Peter's apartment has a view of pine trees in the distance, the streets are dotted with fall leaves, the moon is clear and bright, and the iconic Portland sign hums in the distance. It's exactly what that story needs it to be, an evergreen piece of heaven that's still disrupted by the chaos back in New York during the day, and a shadowy city that's still tall enough to have some web swinging and monster fights at night. In Lost Hunt, however, a lot more of the reality of Portland is shown. Now, Portland isn't the post-apocalyptic hellhole that national news tends to paint it as. It's not Mad Max out here, and it never has been. But one stereotype that does ring true is that it rains a lot. A whole damn lot. I genuinely think that there might be more scenes in this book where it's raining than there are where it isn't. And if it isn't raining, there are clouds brewing in the distance. We also see a lot more of Peter's time working at Portland State University. We see MJ teaching a high school theater class and taking the TriMet bus home. It's much more of a Portland-specific story as opposed to a generic distant city from New York.
My city, my Portland!
Honestly, it's a shame we haven't gotten more Spider-Man stories from this odd Portland era. Admittedly, it is a very short era with barely any room to actually fit another adventure, but damn it, if DC can write 400 stories about the real first time Batman met Superman, then I can get one more Portland Spidey story. When was the last time we saw Peter fight in a forest? That'd be amazing. And speaking of those forests, Part 2. Oregon is creepy. If you're a Grimm, Longlegs, or even a Gravity Falls fan, I don't really have to explain that to a lot of folks, Oregon tends to be a little spooky. I think there's something about living in an area that used to be primarily deep forest that makes you feel like you're almost in a haunted house at times. Something feels off about fall in Oregon, if that makes sense. One comic that captures this perfectly is Mike Allred's Dead Air from 1989. Allred, a former professor at the University of Oregon, also worked as a radio host for some time, and he's clearly grappling with some complex feelings about that as portrayed in this semi-autobiographical book. book. The story follows a young father and husband working as a radio DJ in the town of Roseburg, Oregon. In this universe, however, the town is considered scientifically and geographically nuke-proof. Basically, they say due to odd scientific factors, Roseburg could survive a nuclear war unscathed somehow. So after the town goes on lockdown, according to an alleged nuclear war breaking out, and the protagonist's family is out of town when it's locked down, he begins to grow paranoid and tries to find them. This book is really odd and seems to be made only for me. Nowhere else will you see references to Phantom of the Paradise and Andy Warhol in the same book. I describe the story as almost an Odyssey? Crossed with one of those walking simulator games from 2015 about the nature of grief or whatever. There's a lot of focus on the empty space of Oregon. The sprawling beaches and the long stretches of highways. It feels almost like a liminal space at some points. Seek it out for an offbeat read. And it's not the only creepy comic that Allred created that focused on an Oregon setting. iZombie saw massive success throughout the 2010s and received the greatest honor any comic can receive: being turned into a middling TV show that ignores large swaths of the comic in an effort to be more realistic. But I am burying the lead slightly. There's a far more recent and less cosmic reason that Oregon can feel off-putting. Part 3. Oregon used to be super racist. Starting in the late 1800s with laws that literally forbade black people from entering the entire state, Oregon has sadly a history of racism that has been painted over by marketing and travel companies. Now, it's nowhere close to something like the American South, but it definitely used to be one of the worst places in the West Coast for this. In A Racist History Shows Why Oregon is Still White, Tiffany Cami states that Oregon is a useful case study for the rest of the nation because the only thing unique about Oregon is it was bold enough to write it down. The same policies, practices, and ideologies that shaped Oregon shaped the nation as a whole. And the best comic-related property to use this sordid past in an interesting way and actually investigate it was, shockingly, The Boys TV show. The character of Stormfront is, in a way, a mirror for the Oregon of the past. She's introduced as a modern, hip, sarcastically comedic soup. She's the exact kind of person who would have a Portlandia tattoo and would call rain liquid sunshine. She'd be on a talk show segment with Gustav, is what I mean. So when she's accused of being racist, and she defends herself by stating she's from Portland, to unaware first-time viewers, it just sounds like her, again, being as millennial core as possible. Like, yeah, of course, haha, the lady with half her head shaved who tweets a lot is from Portland, Oregon. But once you get to the reveal that she's actually far older than she looks, it becomes immediately unsettling. And this is probably the last interesting thing that The Boys TV show did for me. I'm never really going to talk about that beyond this, because it just fell flat after that last season. Jesus Christ. But let's look past the monstrous acts of recent generations who are now thankfully long dead. What is the best Oregon comic book? Well, for me, it's one that combines all of these aspects that we discussed. Part 4. The perfect Oregon comic, for now, is Hellboy: Secret Nature. Yes, folks, actually titled Hellboy in the BPRD 1955, the story Secret Nature has everything I want in a book set here. It's got some solid creepy moments, it's got some good moments of escapism. The book stars the titular demon himself and a young cryptozoologist named Woodrow as they investigate sightings of livestock being devoured at night in southern Oregon. Now, I've spent a lot of time in southern Oregon, and every panel in this feels like it could be a stylized photo of somewhere I've actually stood. The book opens with an eyewitness interview being derailed by a farmer being openly racist towards Woodrow. As he and Hellboy enter the woods, they discuss Woodrow's harassment by white folks due to his job and education. But when out in the forests of Oregon, it becomes the escape we discussed. He's no longer with those people. He's with another outcast, who also happens to be a peer in his field of study. This is another reason why a lot of people love Oregon. It feels like a place where you can go out to and actually meet like-minded people who share your same beliefs. They come across a cabin littered with bodies as the shadows outside stretch as night falls. Now we again have Oregon as horror, as an area where the barrier between the normal and the paranormal feels thinner. The two battle a demon, just solid classic Mignola action banter here. Nothing to really point at, but nothing really to decry either. And they managed to successfully banish it back to hell. The next morning, ranchers gather to hear the news, and the man from before again harasses Woodrow. And this is where it becomes the Oregon comic to me. Hellboy gets in his face again, but Woodrow tells him that they've got to move on. There's more out there and it needs to be discovered, even if those assholes back there are gonna try and slow us down. That's Oregon to me. It's an area of limitless possibilities that marginalized people often find themselves in and are still being harassed. But they continue to move forward because they realize that this is a new frontier, as long as you don't let those assholes back there drag you down. Thank you for watching. Consider donating to my Patreon. This video subject was actually voted on by my donors, and it actually helps go towards the comic book that, again, I mentioned earlier. I'm writing my own comic book about the history of Portland and Oregon as a whole, called Destitute. I'm also gonna have more than one video out this month, thanks to those patrons. Thank you again, and have a lovely day.